The bartender at Ciro's nightclub saw it first. He was polishing glasses behind the mahogany bar when Kirk Douglas entered, and he noticed the exact moment everything changed. The band was playing something slow and sultry, the kind of music that made Hollywood's elite feel sophisticated and dangerous. Rita Hayworth had been sitting alone for nearly an hour. Unusual for her, since men usually swarmed around her like moths to flame. But that night, she seemed wrapped in invisible armor, her emerald eyes distant, lost somewhere between the rim of her martini glass and memories she was trying to drown. The bartender watched Kirk Douglas pause at the entrance, scanning the room with that predatory confidence he carried like cologne. Their eyes met, and in that single moment, the bartender later told his wife he knew something irreversible was about to happen. A waiter, carrying a silver tray of champagne flutes, nearly dropped everything when he saw them finally approach each other on the dance floor. A photographer from Life magazine, positioned discreetly in the corner, raised his camera, then slowly lowered it, as if some invisible force warned him this particular moment wasn't meant to be captured. The club's manager, who had seen every scandal Hollywood could produce, felt his stomach tighten with a premonition he couldn't name. Because what unfolded between Kirk Douglas and Rita Hayworth that night wasn't just attraction, wasn't just chemistry. It was the kind of dangerous collision that could only end in destruction. And everyone in that room somehow knew it. Rita Hayworth arrived at Ciro's that night, carrying wounds nobody could see. Her marriage to Orson Welles had collapsed spectacularly just months before. The brilliant director who had tried to transform her into something beyond Gilda's shadow, only to crush her spirit in the process. Columbia Pictures still owned her contract, still manufactured her image, still reduced her to that single moment. The black satin glove slowly peeling off in Gilda. She was trying to reclaim herself, piece by shattered piece. The bartender remembered her ordering a martini, extra dry, no garnish. Simple, direct, like she was tired of decoration. Kirk Douglas entered wearing confidence like armor, the kind of man who believed his presence alone changed the temperature of any room. He had an Bidens waiting for him, the woman who would eventually become his wife, the one who would tame Hollywood's most untamable bachelor. But that night, and was somewhere else, and Kirk was hunting. When Kirk's eyes found her across that crowded room, something shifted. The waiter carrying champagne flutes would later describe it to his roommate. It was like watching two storms recognize each other. Kirk Douglas didn't walk toward Rita Hayworth. He moved like gravity itself was pulling him, inevitable and irresistible. Every conversation seemed to quiet. Every head seemed to turn, sensing something momentous about to occur. Rita looked up as a shadow fell across her table. For 3 seconds, neither spoke. The band played. Glasses clinked. Laughter echoed from distant tables. But in that small corner of Ciro's nightclub, time held its breath. "You look like you're trying to disappear," Kirk said. His voice, that famous baritone, carried an edge of vulnerability nobody expected from Hollywood's toughest leading man. Rita's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "And you look like you're trying to conquer something." She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Good luck with that." The photographer from Life magazine raised his camera. He had captured countless Hollywood moments, marriages that would crumble, affairs that would explode, scandals that would define careers. His finger hovered over the shutter button as Kirk's hand settled on Rita's waist, as her head tilted toward his shoulder with an intimacy that looked nothing like performance. Then he lowered the camera. Years later, before his death, the photographer told his daughter, "Some moments aren't meant to be captured. They're too real for the fantasy machine." He never explained what he meant, but his daughter understood the weight in his voice, the regret of witnessing something authentic in a world built entirely on manufactured illusion. The club manager watched Kirk and Rita sway to a slow jazz number, their movements synchronized in a way that suggested this wasn't their first dance together. Impossible, since they'd never been publicly connected before that night. But their bodies knew something their conscious minds hadn't yet acknowledged. This was dangerous territory. Around 1:30 a.m., they disappeared onto the balcony. Ciro's had a private balcony, accessible only through a discreet door past the restrooms. Studio executives used it for secret negotiations. Married stars used it for affairs they believed the velvet ropes could protect. Kirk and Rita vanished through that door, and for 20 minutes, nobody saw them. When they returned to the main floor, something had fundamentally changed. The club manager noticed it immediately. The way Kirk's hand lingered at the small of Rita's back, proprietary and protective. The way Rita's armor had completely dissolved, her emerald eyes no longer distant, but present, alive, dangerously exposed. The bartender poured them each one more drink. Kirk's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the glass, barely noticeable, but the bartender had been watching people's hands for 20 years. He knew the signs of a man, realizing he'd just stepped off a cliff. Somewhere around 2 a.m., the studio system's immune response activated. A man in an expensive suit. Nobody remembered his face clearly, as if he existed only as function, not person, appeared at the manager's elbow. Words were exchanged. The manager's face went pale. He approached Kirk's table, leaned down, whispered something that made Kirk's jaw tighten. Rita saw the shift immediately. Her armor snapped back into place with almost audible force. Whatever spell had bound them for 4 hours shattered like champagne glass hitting marble floor. Kirk stood. Rita remained seated, her face now a perfect mask. The manufactured composure Columbia Pictures had spent years training into her. Kirk looked down at her, and witnesses would later swear they saw genuine anguish flash across his features before the famous Douglas intensity reasserted control. This was, he started. Nothing, Rita finished, her voice steady. This was nothing that happened. By dawn, the machinery of silence was in full operation. The photographer from Life magazine received a call from his editor. The film from Ciro's was not to be developed. When he protested, mentioning he'd captured other celebrities that night, his editor's voice turned ice cold. Especially not the Douglas Hayworth material. Especially not that. The photographer's career mysteriously stalled after that night. Assignments dried up. Calls weren't returned. Within 6 months, he'd left Hollywood entirely, moving to Arizona to photograph weddings and high school graduations. He kept the undeveloped film in a safe deposit box until his death in 1987. The bartender was offered a promotion, management of a new club opening in Palm Springs, on the condition he sign a non-disclosure agreement about celebrity patrons. He signed. The promotion never materialized, but the message was clear. The waiter simply disappeared from Hollywood. His roommate filed a missing person report, but police showed minimal interest. Years later, someone claimed to have seen him working at a restaurant in Seattle, but when approached, the man denied ever living in Los Angeles. The club manager died of a heart attack in 1953, just 2 years after that April night. Some whispered it wasn't his heart that killed him, but the weight of secrets Hollywood's powerful had made him carry. Kirk Douglas married in bide-ins in 1954. Their marriage would last 66 years, a genuine miracle in Hollywood terms, and by all accounts, it was the woman who finally tamed the untamable man. But those close to Kirk noticed something. He never returned to Ciro's. When asked why, he'd changed the subject with unusual abruptness for a man famous for confronting everything head-on. In his 1988 autobiography, The Ragman's Son, Kirk wrote about his wild years before settling down. He mentioned dozens of affairs, conquests, fleeting attractions. He never mentioned Rita Hayworth. Not once. The omission was so conspicuous that some Hollywood historians noted it specifically. Why would Kirk Douglas, famous for his brutal honesty about his philandering past, exclude one of the era's most beautiful actresses from his romantic history? Unless something happened that couldn't be reduced to conquest. Unless that night at Ciro's revealed something about himself, Kirk Douglas spent the rest of his life trying to forget. Rita Hayworth's life took darker turns. More failed marriages, career decline, and finally, the cruelest fate, Alzheimer's disease, diagnosed in 1980. As her memory dissolved, she'd sometimes mention names from her past. Orson, Ali Khan, her daughters. And according to one nurse who cared for her in the mid-1980s, occasionally Kirk, spoken with a tenderness that seemed disconnected from any public relationship. When a nurse asked Rita's daughter about Kirk, she was told, "There's no Kirk in Mother's history. You must have misheard." In 2018, an estate sale in Pasadena included boxes from the deceased bartender's grandson. Among yellowed photographs and ticket stubs, a leather journal emerged. Inside, entries from 1951, including detailed observations about celebrity patrons at Ciro's nightclub. The April 17th entry ran 3 pages, unusual for typically brief notations, describing Kirk Douglas and Rita Hayworth's 4-hour encounter with a detail that suggested the bartender knew he was witnessing something historically significant. The journal's final line about that night: "Watch 2 gods remember they were human. Hollywood will make them forget again by morning." The Life magazine photographer's daughter, cleaning out her father's safe deposit box after his death, found the undeveloped film canister marked Ciro's April 1951. Do not develop. She had it processed in 2019. Most images were standard celebrity shots: Dean Martin laughing, Jane Russell holding court. But 3 frames showed Kirk Douglas and Rita Hayworth on that dance floor, and the intimacy captured was so raw, so genuine, that even 40 years after both their deaths, the images felt like violation. She never published them. Some moments, she decided, should remain sacred. When Kirk Douglas died in February 2020 at age 103, obituaries celebrated Spartacus, Champion, his pioneering independent production work, his 66-year marriage to N. Rita Hayworth had died in 1987, her Alzheimer's having stolen everything: memories, identity, the very self Columbia Pictures had manufactured and the real woman had struggled to reclaim. What actually happened between Kirk Douglas and Rita Hayworth on that April night in 1951? The witnesses are gone. The photographs remain hidden. The studio system that enforced silence has long since crumbled. But the bartender's journal, the photographer's daughter's memories, and the conspicuous omission in Kirk's own autobiography suggest something profound occurred. Something that couldn't be reduced to typical Hollywood affair, couldn't be processed through the usual machinery of scandal and publicity. Maybe it was recognition. 2 wounded souls, both trapped in golden cages of fame, briefly seeing each other's authentic humanity before the machine reasserted control. Maybe it was possibility, a glimpse of lives they might have lived if Hollywood hadn't owned them so completely. Maybe it was simply 4 hours when 2 people, famous for performing every moment of their public lives, accidentally became real. The truth is, we'll never know exactly what happened on Ciro's balcony that night. But the lengths Hollywood went to erase those 4 hours from history suggest it was something the fantasy machine couldn't process, couldn't manufacture, couldn't control. Some collisions are too dangerous to document. Some moments burn too bright for the carefully managed mythology Hollywood built around its gods and goddesses. And sometimes, the most powerful love stories are the ones that officially never happened, existing only in fragments, whispers, and the trembling hand of a bartender pouring one last drink for 2 people who just realized they'd glimpsed something they could never have. Kirk Douglas spent 103 years becoming a legend. Rita Hayworth spent a lifetime trying to exist beyond Gilda's shadow. But for 4 hours in April 1951, they were just 2 people, vulnerable, authentic, dangerously human. And Hollywood made certain nobody would ever know.